I'm Savannah Kelly, and this is APTN News in Focus. It's been almost 1 year since the Cowichan Tribe won a landmark decision recognizing Aboriginal title to land owned by the Crown and the City of Richmond. On today's show, we wanted to share another episode of APTN News Answers, where my colleague Jessie Andrushko and I dive in to figure out what the court decision actually means and what's at stake.
Can a First Nation take your land? Can a First Nation reclaim its land? Homeowners out of BC are panicking and concerned.
Roads and any development if you want
Try and take it from
Cowichan
This world is getting absolutely ridiculous.
My name is Jessie Andrushko.
And I'm Savannah Kelly. Welcome to APTN News Answers.
Some people online seem to think that their houses will become worthless and that First Nations will kick them off their land. So Savannah, is this possible?
That is a great question. So when we're talking about land back, one relevant case that we can look at is the Cowichan Tribe in BC. So in August 2025, they had a recent court case decision that granted them Aboriginal title to an area of land in Richmond, BC that's currently occupied by many privately owned homes, businesses, industry, things like that. But why this specific area of land? For that, we're going to need a quick history lesson. So in the 1800s, these lands were set aside for the Cowichan for the eventual creation of an Indian reserve, but it never happened. So the Cowichan settlement was never established as official Indian reserve lands. Then those lands were sold out from under them to settlers without their knowledge. So between 1871 and 1914, the Crown granted numerous private land ownership titles over much of the area. The court said that this process deprived the Cowichan of their village lands, severely impeded their ability to fish the south arm of the Fraser River, and were an unjustified infringement of their Aboriginal title.
So land meant for the Cowichan along the Fraser River was instead sold off over the years without them knowing. I can see why the Cowichan want their land back. I guess, why are we hearing about this now, though?
So the Supreme Court ruling happened in August 2025, but the case has been a long time coming. So the Cowichan, they first filed it in court in March 2014. The trial didn't begin until 5.5 years later, September 2019. And then, of course, we know in 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic happened, which caused further delays. So this Aboriginal title decision, it's been in the works for over a decade. It looked at thousands of exhibits, looked at history spanning centuries. So we're getting the decision and the outcome of that court case today, but the case has been a long time coming.
Right, makes sense why it takes so long. You mentioned Aboriginal title. What is that exactly?
Yeah, Aboriginal title. So the Supreme Court of Canada legally defines Aboriginal title as the right to exclusive use and occupation of land. So essentially, if the Cowichan Tribe or another group wanted to establish Aboriginal title, they would need to be able to prove in court that they had exclusive occupation and use of that land before the Crown asserted its sovereignty over the land, essentially. And then those lands can only then be given or sold back to the Crown and not any private enterprises.
So really it means that a First Nation has the rights over a specific area of land if they can prove they were there before the Europeans came over. And if they want to sell it, they can only sell it to the federal government.
Exactly. So once the Aboriginal title's been established, the Cowichan, they could choose to sell it back to the federal government, freely give it back, or even have leasing opportunities on that land, but only with the federal government, no other third parties.
So back to the Cowichan Tribe decision in BC, why are homeowners concerned? Could they lose their homes because of this?
So the Cowichan released a statement after this court case had come out because obviously it's causing a lot of fear of what's going on. But they said that essentially this ruling doesn't erase private property and that Aboriginal title and privately owned land titles can coexist.
Could the Cowichan go after private landowners?
The short answer is no for these landowners in this specific Aboriginal claim area. The longer answer would be that the balance of these lands for privately owned property were specifically not included in this action. So the Cowichan, when they filed this and it wound its way through the courts, none of it was ever going after privately owned lands. It's about their relationship with Canada, City of Richmond, province of BC. Those are the lands that they were essentially trying to get back. So that means that the situation as it stands, privately owned properties, they should function as normal. But yeah, the Aboriginal title and privately owned can coexist. And yeah, the privately owned lands are not within the scope of the decision as it stands. If the Cowichan wanted to go after those lands, it would be an entirely different court decision.
It's kind of ironic that landowners are upset over the idea of losing their land to the Cowichan when that's exactly what happened to them, right?
Exactly. Like 200 years ago, these lands were set aside for them, and then without their knowledge, they're sold to other parties. So, yeah, there is a level of irony there, but it doesn't mean that privately owned land owners in Richmond should be losing their land. Is kind of a eye for an eye sort of situation.
So not only are the Cowichan saying they aren't going after private land, though, in the BC court decision, they literally say they're not seeking control over private land.
Correct.
I guess if you think about it, land across Canada really could be taken from the government if they wanted to do roads or other major projects.
Yeah, you make a really good point. So basically, that would be expropriation. So any privately owned landowner across Canada today could find out that their property is being erased through the federal government, provincial government, or municipal government seeking out expropriation. So that's when they basically take back that land for public use and benefit. So that could be if they want to build new roadways, schools, hospitals, things like that. So while there is a fear with these landowners in the Cowichan Aboriginal Title area in Richmond, BC, they're rightfully worried, but also land ownership does come with a baseline possibility for expropriation. But, I want to reiterate that the Cowichan are not going to be seeking out their land. So expropriation risks are very minimal. And also expropriation isn't extremely common either across the board in the country.
So private landowners won't lose their property and will keep their title. What about property value? What happens with that?
So, the value of anything can change for better or worse, fully based on public perception. The world works in mysterious ways like that. But what this case has done has created a level of perceived uncertainty over what happens next. So whether that's going to affect property rights or business deals, we're already kind of seeing the beginnings of that. So the Canadian press, they reported that an Ontario company had pulled out of a luxury hotel deal. They were supposed to buy this luxury hotel for the tune of tens of millions of dollars. And the company cited the Cowichan Aboriginal title claim as a reason for pulling out of the deal. But the kicker on that one is it's not even within the boundaries of this Aboriginal title claim. So it's having ripple effects, not even within the boundaries of where the claim is, but even nearby. People are getting worried. So it's also affected other business deals within the Aboriginal title area, as well. So as for property values for privately owned properties, it's kind of too soon to say. So again, the decision came out August 2025. Property assessments for that area came out early January 2026, but they're dated to July 1st of 2025. So people are getting their assessments and it's from before the decision actually came through. So it's kind of too soon to see what the ripple effects could be for people that are looking to either sell their homes or have the assessment of what are their properties worth.
So the decision mainly is causing fear because of the perceived uncertainty, despite the Cowichan saying they aren't going after private land. So that could potentially affect
Absolutely.
property values. I guess if private landowners aren't affected, who actually is?
So the groups that are actually affected by this decision in a more tangible way are Canada, Province of BC, Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, which is an agency of the federal government, and the City of Cowichan. So the court decision basically had found out that activities in this area infringed on the Cowichan's Aboriginal rights. So Canada, the City of Richmond's ownership of lands within that claim area have now been declared invalid by the court. The Province of BC and the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, they were determined to have unjustifiably infringed on the Cowichan's rights. So now these parties essentially need to negotiate with the Cowichan on what happens next for Canada and the City of Richmond that actually own lands, and also just for reconciliation purposes with the Province of BC.
So every level of government is affected, along with the Port Authority that is in charge of those federal port lands. Do they have buildings there? Are they going to have to move? What does that look like?
Yeah, so the federal government owns 11 lots in and around the Aboriginal title claim area, and all of them are being administered by the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority. So in that area, it's like a lot of industrial stuff. So you're seeing warehouses, shipping containers. Just like looking at the area in Google Maps, you're seeing a lot of industry. But 3 of those 11 lots actually fall within the boundaries of the Aboriginal title claim area. So one exception is a portion of one lot that falls under the Vancouver Airport Fuel Delivery Projects lands. And that's essentially a project that is necessary, a system that's deemed necessary for the operation of the Vancouver International Airport. So in terms of that portion of that lot, the Cowichan specifically chose not to challenge the legal status of those lands, so they can continue operating as normal under this new Aboriginal title decision. But Canada is still required to negotiate in good faith with the Cowichan on basically matters of reconciliation in terms of those lands as well. So in terms of, everything that's outside of that one specific exception, we need to kind of see what that's going to look like. So, obviously there's a lot of industry already there, whether they're going to have to move, demolish, lease it. Like there's a lot of different ways this could go, but it will really come down to negotiations between the Cowichan and these groups to see what happens. Because essentially, they could lease it to Canada. Canada could continue using these lands as they have, but it remains to be seen.
Yeah. What about property taxes or, roads? Like who is going to take care of the infrastructure going forward? Is it the City of Richmond or is it the Cowichan?
So the court had mandated that essentially for the roadways, for where property taxes are going to be allocated, that it needs to be negotiated between the City of Richmond and the Cowichan. So the specifics essentially still need to be figured out on that front as well.
Early days.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's interesting. 2 other Indigenous groups oppose the Cowichan in this case. Why is that?
Yeah, so there were 2 Indigenous groups that were also defendants in this court case. That was the Musqueam Indian Band and the Tawasin First Nation. So Musqueam Indian Band, they were essentially concerned over how this Aboriginal title claim for the Cowichan could affect their rights. They asserted that this Aboriginal title area basically fell within their traditional territory as well, but the court found that that wasn't the case, and they weren't occupying the same lands at the time that the Crown asserted its sovereignty over the land. And also the Musqueam asserted that the Cowichan fished the south arm of the Fraser River with their permission. But the court found that basically the Musqueam didn't control the Cowichan's right to fish in the south arm of the Fraser River, and basically, had refuted the arguments that they put forward in court. As for the Tawasin First Nation, they're under a modern treaty, so they also had concerns over how this Aboriginal title claim was going to affect their rights. But one interesting thing is they also argued that there didn't exist an organized, recognized nation known as the Cowichan Tribes during that time period. But the court also kind of pushed back on that and basically concluded that the Cowichan were an Aboriginal people or group at the time of contact that had their own shared identity, like collective identity, shared way of life.
Right. So a community can still be loosely organized, but have rights.
Absolutely.
So we've established why the Cowichan, why now, and what's actually affected. What's next?
A whole lot of wait and see, essentially, as we've been kind of talking through these questions and trying to figure out, what is this title decision doing? There's a lot of negotiations that need to happen, reconciliation, but essentially from the time that the decision came out, August 2025, there's an 18-month suspension. So yes, the court has declared that the Cowichan have this Aboriginal title, but we won't know exactly until early 2027, 18 months later, what that's going to look like. This is basically a grace period to allow all the defendants to have time for transition, negotiation, and basically what that handoff could look like.
So really all the panic online is from the unknown. Despite the ruling saying that the Cowichan isn't going after private property. Yeah. Well, thanks, Savannah, for adding some clarity to the situation.
Yeah, another thing to add is the defendants in this case have all said that they're going to appeal as well. So even after this 18 months, who knows what that's going to look like? It could be years, if not decades, going through the courts before we have a final decision. But, at the end of the day, the long story short is it's a big win for the Cowichan. Obviously, land back isn't an instant process, but legal precedences are being set with this case, so we'll see what happens.
We'll be back for more, I'm sure.
Yeah.
If you have any suggestions of what topic for us to tackle next, email us at answers@aptn.ca.
See you next time. If you enjoyed that and want to hear more APTN News Answers, find the full series on the APTN News YouTube channel or on aptnnews.ca. I'm Savannah Kelly. Thanks for listening.